My philosophy in lessons is this is a safe environment to make mistakes. We are here to mess up, to try things, to get outside of our comfort zone, to get beyond what is safe so that we can try something. And if it doesn't work, no one dies if you squeak on the clarinet. It's fine.
Building a thriving private music studio, mastering hybrid teaching and marketing, supporting musicians worldwide to succeed. My next guest has figured out how to master all of this, and she's going to teach you how to do it coming up right now on the Honesty Pill podcast. All right, everybody, and welcome to episode 44. Oh my God, I've been doing this for 44 episodes. It's crazy. The Honesty Pill podcast. We are here to help you navigate all things music, whether it's improving your practice, performing with confidence, crushing those auditions, or even starting out your own music-related business. We're going to talk a lot about that today. This season, we're digging deep into the details, what happens behind the scenes in the practice room, the highs and lows of those auditions, and the strategies that power the business side of a music career. Today, we're talking to someone who has mastered the balance between being a performer and a business-savvy teacher. She's here to share how she turned her love of music into a thriving, multifaceted portfolio career. Remember that word, portfolio career. We're going to talk about that a little bit more and how you can do the same. But first, a quick shout out to the sponsor of the Honesty Pill podcast, the Yamaha Corporation of America. Yamaha helps me bring this podcast, information, and guests to you totally free. Well, I lied. It's 99% free, 99.9% free. What I ask is that you click like on this video right now, and please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. Both of those things really do help us out over here at Honesty Pill Mission Control. And thank you so much to Yamaha for keeping this thing going. We truly appreciate it. And we are live streaming this episode. No net, no edits. So go ahead and drop your questions in the chat, and please subscribe by hitting that little bell so you don't miss a thing happening over here on the podcast. All right, let's get into it. Hang on, let me get Kelly up here. Today's guest is a true powerhouse in music education and performance, Kelly Riordan. Starting her journey at age 5, Kelly built a thriving career as a performer, educator, and entrepreneur. She's the co-founder of Outside the Bachs, B-A-C-H-S, as in Johann Sebastian, Outside the Bachs podcast. More on that later. Helping over 3,000 teachers and students build successful music studios worldwide. There is way too much to talk about right here, but we're going to do our best. Welcome to the podcast, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Chris. I know this has been a long time coming. We've been chatting about this for a long time. I'm just so excited to be here. We're going to have a good time.
Right. Kelly was a guest in my Audition Accelerator program. I was on Kelly's podcast. And we've met on Instagram, which is just like, it's worth it to say. Social media has its ups and downs for sure, but there's some real positives out there and some good things. So what's your Thanksgiving plans this week? Your studio shutting down? You're going to take a little bit of a break?
Oh yeah, that's the beauty. I'm sure we'll talk about, studio structure and things like that later, but the beauty of a flat rate monthly tuition is you get all that time off. So I have a nice long week next week. I'm taking maybe 2 or 3 client calls on Tuesday and then taking some back end work. Otherwise get to hang out with my family, which will be lovely. Are you off next week too?
Well, this is the first time in LA Phil history that we're not the first time, but one of the first times we're getting regular Thanksgiving weeks off. They reshuffled some of the things, but I have to tell you, it's fantastic because one of the downsides of being a professional orchestral musician is you're kind of absent for some of the main normal things, especially if you're a freelancer. You're working Christmas Eve, you're working Christmas Day, you're working all these weird holidays. And Thanksgiving is one that I've never been able to make it, but we're traveling to the in-laws so the grandparents can spoil the kids this week. It's going to be great.
Oh, that's awesome. Sounds like so much fun.
So, I think I just want to jump right in and talk about Outside the Box. What does it stand for? What do we want people to know about it? Why is it called that? We're going to dig deep into that, but I want to hear a little bit about sort of your mission with that offering and why you created it.
Yeah. I mean, candidly, the program started, I'd like to say it was an accident, but it was more of a perfect storm, if you will. I'm sure we all remember 2020, everything shut down, right? And in spring of 2020, I had relocated about 6 months prior to the shutdown. I'd moved across the country from Georgia to Wisconsin and restarted my own private studio. And at that time, I was coming out of a graduate program, which I was paying for by working in marketing. So I had a lot of great marketing background and knowledge and skills. And I applied all that to my own studio. And within about 2.5 months, I had roughly 43 private lesson students. My main instrument is clarinet. I had a couple piano students thrown in there also, which was something I really enjoyed. And the studio was really solid. I was really enjoying what I was doing. I had great income and revenue. When we relocated, that was the entire plan. I had no backup plan. So I was really thankful that it grew as much as it did. Come COVID time, I had friends asking me how that happened because they couldn't perform. And so what started as me giving advice on Zoom uh, quickly grew into people calling me that I didn't know and friends of a friend of a friend. And all of a sudden I was on Zoom for like 20 hours a week. And I had some other plans. I was looking at doing an AP music theory class, and a friend of ours sat me down and said, really, you kind of have a business. And Isaac, my husband and co-founder, was really a huge help in me putting that together and figuring out how to package everything. But the outside of the box mission is to support musicians in starting or growing or scaling their own private lesson studio. So no matter what that stage is, no matter what your goals are for the studio, the idea is that we're looking at sustainable organic marketing, a profitable lesson package, and also having a really repeatable enrollment process so that when we get on the sales portion of the conversation, we're doing so confidently and authentically, and it's not weird and uncomfortable. So we support a lot of different areas in the business. So as we're talking about the questions and everything too, we can run the full gamut for sure on private teaching. But it's been a wild ride, and I really, really love what we do.
I almost wanted to make a bit of a joke and say, yeah, like, all the music business stuff that we learned back in conservatory, right? But obviously that's hilarious because we didn't learn anything about music entrepreneurship. I know there are schools that are doing things right now. I've had some guests on from Juilliard. People are starting to dip their toe in this and realize that a portfolio career, which we'll define in a second, is not only much more interesting, it's way more lucrative. It's just also kind of required now. You can't really just focus on just doing your instrument really well. And I've said that 100 times in this podcast. But 43 students, to me, my math, let me do carry the one, that seems like a lot. How do you structure a teaching studio to avoid burnout? And what do you think the biggest mistake most music teachers make when even if there's not hybrid, when they're starting out getting their music studio set up?
I think so. So two parts on that. One, I would say 43 students for me was around 23, 22, 23 hours per week of teaching. So when we think about having a large music studio and what that income and that schedule can look like, part of the reason I was so intentional about building a private studio is that I knew I would have time for other projects. Like, yeah, it's a lot, and yeah, it is a lot of energy and effort, but I was never teaching more than 5 or 5.5 hours a day. So it was very compact. It was very easy for me to balance my life around that. And I really was looking for that balance because at the time when I finished my graduate program, I thought I was going to go take auditions. I thought I had a fabulous chamber ensemble that I still play in, not as often, but we're all across the country now. But at that point, I was really looking at building a chamber career as well. And I was looking at the studio as being the staple source of income and revenue to help support and fund those other endeavors. Now, I love teaching, and I've been teaching since I was 16. It's one of my favorite things to do. So it was not like a backup plan, but I knew that would kind of be the baseline, and I could build off of that as we're talking about before the portfolio career. As far as avoiding burnout, I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make really early on is that we kind of treat it like a side hustle or a hobby. Like, oh, I'm just teaching a few lessons on the side. And the result of that is we don't really structure or treat it like a business. And so we make decisions in our business planning and structure, like how we're accepting payment or how we're charging tuition, or maybe not using a studio management software or using something to organize even revenue and expenses for tax purposes. And all of a sudden, a few months go by, or you've been doing this for a year or two, and the thing that is the most stressful or is causing the most burnout is usually the admin work. It's not the teaching. We like that part. It's the admin work. And I think the second misstep that we can make is saying yes to any student or being very generalist in our approach to accepting students. That I can help anyone with anything kind of approach. And in reality, there are some students that we just vibe with better. I think we've all probably been on the receiving end of that relationship where we've been the student to a teacher that wasn't the perfect fit for us. And it's not the most effective or fulfilling relationship. So being really intentional helps with our fulfillment and avoid burnout, but also means that students are getting really good results. And that definitely impacts the marketing and growth too.
So let's just contextualize this conversation for a second because we jumped right into the weeds. musicians have to redefine how they view themselves if this is going to be successful. And I'm speaking as an orchestral musician as well. It's not the norms that I think maybe we learned in school about this is what the path looks like. There really is no linear path to success in this career. And frankly, flipping the paradigm, the script of what you think being a music educator or performing artist or an orchestral musician or whatever looks like is really more of a mindset shift than anything else. And I mean, you definitely have to have the nuts and bolts. We're going to talk about all those in a bit, but like viewing how you show up in the world and how you serve and how you lead with service is sort of like changing. You know, can you speak to that a little bit in terms of, I mean, when you grew up, did you think you were going to perform? I know you're playing with the Athena Trio, which is a all women group. We're going to talk about that a little bit. You don't have to quit one part or the other. You can actually do all these things. Was that something that intentionally you set out to do?
When I was younger and I closed my eyes and visualized my perfect situation, I thought I would be on a stage somewhere. I thought I would be in a professional orchestra. It shifted for me a little bit in my graduate program when I realized that it obviously, as you know firsthand, the scheduling can be really difficult. And that was something I was a little bit less enthusiastic about. I also really like to select my own repertoire. I like to have a say in what I'm playing. And that was part of why chamber music was so exciting for me. And I found a really fantastic trio that I was working with. And so that was such an exciting, fulfilling way for me to play and express myself. And I found in the 2 years of my graduate program that those were the moments where my instrument was in hand and I felt the most happy, the most relaxed, the most artistically fulfilled, the most like energized by what I was doing was when I was in a room with those 2 other fabulous musicians, Claudio Malchow and Caroline Owen, and making music together. And it's an interesting trio. It's clarinet, piano, and viola. So we have a really kind of interesting repertoire on that end, but it's just so lovely to play with people that do bring you that fulfillment, and I liked being in that situation. So as I was trying to figure out what things looked like after graduation, I knew I was relocating. They were relocating. We all spread out pretty soon afterwards. And initially, obviously pre-pandemic, we were making a lot of effort to get together on a regular basis and play. We were doing festivals, we were entering into competitions. Things have shifted a little bit. I have a TMJ injury that I'm recovering from, which I'm sure we'll chat about at some point. But that was the goal coming out of school was I'm going to teach and have a really stable income and revenue. So I know I can pay my bills and I know I'm really stable and I've got a reliable source there. And then that frees me up to do all the things that make me artistically fulfilled. And candidly, if I hadn't been in that situation, if I had another, a day job or a non-music job potentially, I mean, outside the box would never have been a thing. That's for sure. Cause I wouldn't have had the time or the energy.
Why is it called Outside the Box?
Ah, I have a dad's sense of humor. It's like the easy answer on that one. I love a good pun. No, it was kellyriordan.com for a really long time. And probably about 6 to 8 months after I had my first paying client, because again, I was doing this a lot for free at first. So about 6 to 8 months after we started that, I started a Facebook group for our clients because they wanted to like kind of chat and work on things together and share what was going on. And we want a little bit more community around that, which was requested by the people that we were working with. And it has now become one of my favorite parts of what we do is have that community basis. And a lot of our clients tend to work together on projects or, they share wins and updates. It's so fun to be able to celebrate together. But I ended up naming that group Outside the Box and spelled BACHS. And I had done that at the time because I kept saying, in order to build a studio, in order to approach your marketing, we have to get outside of our comfort zone. We have to think outside the box. And I kept saying it BOX, outside the box. And then it just kind of became an inside joke with a few clients. And then I kind of had to roll with it. It was too good to pass up. So
Look,
it was a perfect fit for us.
you're talking to a guy who, for some reason, named his business the Honesty Pill. So I'm there for the, I don't even know if it was the best idea. I know I get caught in a lot of spam filters because people see the word pill and they're like, oh, I'm not interested in anything like that. So, trading dollars for hours is the model. I know when I was taking trumpet lessons, when I was beginning piano lessons, it was, my parents would drive to the music teacher's house. They'd give him a handful of cash and then I'd get a 30, 45-minute lesson. And it worked. I mean, I remember my trumpet teacher in high school, he lived in a tiny little house, looked like a shoebox. And he had like a ton of students. He was a great teacher, a great performer. Shout out to Dave Naylor. You're amazing. But it was definitely a thing where if he wanted to take a vacation, like I'm taking this week, or if he got sick, or if I had, a marching band competition or something like that, he didn't get paid. So you mentioned creating a profitable lesson package and flat rate tuition models as
Mhm.
like key pillars for success in running an actual thriving studio. What are your thoughts on that? And how do you think for teachers who are charging by the hour, how might that feel like a really big leap for them?
Mm. Well, it is a big leap. It feels a little scary to structure something more, especially when sometimes the flexibility of a pay per lesson system is also advantageous to the teacher, right? Sometimes we are traveling or we are gigging or we are taking auditions, and it's really nice to be able to just cancel a lesson whenever we need to and not worry about it. Now, the downside, obviously, we're talking at the very beginning about our Thanksgiving plans. The downside is that if there's a holiday or if your students are going to be gone or if we do need to take off because we're sick or whatever happens, we lose income fast. December is one of my favorite examples of this. Usually, the last 2 weeks of the year are a mess for studio scheduling. The students are off of school and therefore want to be off of lessons. We have holidays and personal travel, family travel, which is, of course, an exciting thing, but can eat into our income and revenue for not teaching. The other concern around that too is if we're trying to ask students to make up lessons, we're trying to squeeze things in, we're not really getting a break. And so if we're talking about burnout and concern around burnout, I remember when I was in graduate school, there were holiday breaks that I was not going home for because I needed to stay back and teach. I needed the income and the revenue. And I had to make other decisions. I couldn't go home for Thanksgiving or spring break as a result. And looking back on that, that was exhausting. I had no time to breathe. And it's so important to have that space. So when we look at a structure that's really favorable for that, a monthly flat rate tuition is a great way to do that. It starts to create more of a salary feel, but we can also build in the flexibility. It's not like you don't get weeks off because you're charging the same amount every single month. You're not guaranteeing 4 lessons per month. It's more on an annual basis, which I'm sure if we have questions, we can talk about that too.
Yeah, I mean, I want to kind of segue this conversation a little bit into. I mean, we're super into the weeds in terms of how to run the
Yeah.
studio. I really want to talk about in a minute, like why you teach, like why is this your calling?
Mhm.
But before we leave this topic, um, it's not really about the teaching hour, is it? Like, there's so much
Mhm.
more that's going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
There's the admin part of it. There's additional values. What sort of things do you recommend or do you use in your own studio that are beyond just that segment of time where you're actually engaging with the student one on one?
Yeah, a good challenge for anyone that's teaching or is thinking about teaching, honestly, is to write down all of the things that are included in your lesson teaching. So, yes, that might be a weekly 30, 45-minute, 60-minute lesson. That probably is also going to be notes after the lesson or feedback. That might be repertoire selection. That might be coaching and mentoring for performance and audition preparation. That might be reviewing recordings for audition submissions. In my studio, I do what I call video exchange lessons. So my students at any time can send me a video of them practicing. I usually limit it to about one per week in theory, but honestly, in the fall, I don't see a lot of these. I see a ton in spring when it's audition season and all my students are looking at youth orchestra, rental, and ensemble. So sometimes I'll get 3 in a week, and so it all balances out. I'm not that worried about it. But usually they'll send me a video of their practice or something they're working on with questions, or if they're just looking for feedback, and I'll send a little like audio drop or a video back to them, giving some feedback and some pointers. Also, recitals, performances, researching audition opportunities for them, and helping them with that process too. There's a lot that can be included in tuition. Some people will even include libraries of pre-recorded content. They might have some instructional videos or information for students that they can reference back, or exercises like vocalists oftentimes will put like backing tracks for warm-ups and instruction for those warm-ups in a library so that people can watch it back during their practice. And there's a lot that can be included in that. So yes, have a fair hourly rate and kind of a baseline rate should be, you should absolutely be charging no less than $60 an hour, like bare minimum if you're in an average cost of living area and you have at least a 4-year degree.
So how do you find that number, $60 an hour?
So that's industry standard. And I say that after taking data from thousands of studios over the last few years. We've done a lot of research into that. It was one of the first things that we did when I started providing information to other musicians, is I started polling people and reaching out to colleagues and trying to figure out what that rate looked like. So our data says that industry standard is if you have a 4-year degree in music, you're in an average cost of living area, average demand, about $1 per minute should be the minimum. It's usually about $10 more, so roughly 70 per hour is a starting point if you have a master's degree, 75 to 85 if you have a DMA or additional performance certificates. But honestly, demand is one of the bigger pieces of that. If you have a wait list or if your spots are filling really, really quickly, then rates should be exponentially higher. And also, location is a massive factor. I keep saying average cost of living area. Obviously, if you're in LA, your rates are going to look really different than they will if we're, in middle of nowhere Midwest, out in my neck of the woods somewhere. But it's really helpful to know what that rate looks like. A great way to assess this is median home price. That's a good kind of frame of reference to compare areas.
All right. So if you're listening, do some math. And I want you to hear what Kelly just said about the basic minimum rate you should be charging, $60 to $70 per hour. Now, I know for a fact there are people listening right now who are like, I'm charging less than half of that.
Mm.
And,
Yeah.
So there's two things we need to talk about when it comes to pricing. Pricing can be such a hot topic for musicians. There's imposter syndrome, there's fear, there's lack mentality about maybe no one will want to hire me, I'm not good enough. There's also districts like Texas that set those rates within the district, and you're kind of stuck with that if you choose to engage with them as employers. So let's talk about a two-part question here. One is, how do we manage this when we're sort of stuck in a system or the status quo in the area is, well, all my colleagues are charging $25 an hour, same qualifications as me, or sometimes more. How do I break out of that? And then two, let's talk a little bit about this mindset that musicians are holding each other to by agreeing to do that. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah. Well, if I I have like two bones to pick with other musicians on pricing. Number one, if have a DMA and your rates are too low, you're holding all the rest of your colleagues back. You really are. And I know sometimes we're looking at accessibility, and that's a really big conversation. And I want to honor that for a second. I was the student that I couldn't afford lessons with a local symphony player in high school. And my teacher, who I'd been with for 8 years, shout out to Val Wazunski, she's a fabulous clarinet instructor. She was excellent. I had her for the first 8 years of my career and my playing. Val came to me my junior year and said, it's time to like shove you out of the nest a little bit. I think you need to go take lessons with the principal clarinet for the Milwaukee Symphony, Todd Levy, also fabulous player. I have so much respect for Todd and his career and his teaching. And when that conversation came up, I knew I couldn't afford it. I'd been trading lessons with Val for babysitting for a while because I was in that situation financially with my family. We were a one single income household at that point, not by choice. And so I had to get creative. I went and got a job at the local music store, and I knew exactly how many hours per week, and I'd worked it out with the owner. Ellen McDonald was fabulous in helping me do this, like do the math and figure out exactly what I needed to do every week so I could pay for my lesson, my gas there and back, because I would drive to my youth orchestra rehearsal right afterwards downtown, and also a snack on the way. That was the goal. And we had all the numbers worked out, all the taxes. We were sitting there doing all the calculations. My coworkers were great. They would shift, schedules around and swap shifts with me to make that happen when I had, school requirements and things. Also, that's an intense situation to be in. I was writing all my own checks for lessons. It was like February of my senior year before Todd looked at me and asked if I even had parents, because I drove myself and I paid for everything myself, which looking back is really funny. And we had a lighthearted conversation about it, but also I was fully independent in doing that. Now, I never want to put my students in that situation. I don't want them to be there. If there's extenuating circumstances going on, I offer in-house scholarships. So if the concern is accessibility for music, I feel that and I understand that so deeply. There are other options. We don't have to discount our prices across the board, because my students who have parents that are both doctors or lawyers can very much afford my very premium rates from my area. I am more expensive than most teachers in my area, but I've never had a hard time filling my lesson slots. Now, the other part of that too is if I have students that are in extenuating circumstances, I will work with them one-on-one. As far as kind of holding each other back too, or concerns around pricing, I think a lot of it comes down to confidence. I am very honest about who my ideal student is. From my studio, that's someone that's high anxiety, usually high performance anxiety, high general anxiety. That was me as a child. I love it. It is so fulfilling. I love working with those kids. Seeing the breakthroughs just brings me to tears. It's so, so cool every single time. And when I'm honest about that, I'm attracting students who resonate with that, and therefore I am a good fit. They're looking at that. They can be so decisive in looking at my marketing and on my website and the wording that I'm using or the testimonials from other students, because it aligns so fully with them. Think about us as students when you are looking at moving across the country to study with someone in conservatory or university, you're willing to uproot your life because it's the right teacher, the right school. And the same thing applies for our students. So pricing isn't really an obstacle if we're aligned. The only obvious little caveat on that is if there are extenuating circumstances or if budget is more important to someone than being with an aligned teacher, in which case we probably can't do a whole lot about that. And they might not be a really ideal fit in that case anyway.
They may not be the right fit at this moment. You may end up coming back to that person later. Who knows?
Oh, for sure.
I'm going to take a total left turn because you just said a real trigger word for me, which is anxiety. Um,
Ah.
it's a different podcast, but wow, are we in an anxious time right now, aren't we?
Yeah.
So Jerry, I've talked about this before on my podcast. Jerry Seinfeld talks about these toolboxes that people get, especially creatives. And he's like, you get all these great toolboxes, organization and drive and
Mm,
the ability to compartmentalize and figure all this stuff. But you also get this tool, which you don't want, but it's in there. It's anxiety. And a
yeah.
lot of times it's the fuel that creates some of them. Some of the best musicians that I know are very anxious people. I mean, I'm one of them. And I've figured out a way to take that anxiety and turn it into functionality, hopefully with some sort of balance. But can you really, I mean, I think that most of us, I think most musicians, I don't know too many of them that are super laid back. Um,
Mm,
I mean, performance anxiety can manifest in several ways, right? It can create um, shaking hands, shortness of breath, heart racing, whatever. But there's another side of anxiety which can create like the dead possum, where you're just sort of going to a bit of a sleepy coma. I think most of the musicians that I work with, I could put them in one of those two buckets. So, like, is that something that you work on as a teacher, helping your
mm.
students cope with pressure? You know, they've got auditions, they've got all state and all county move up things, they've got parents who are hounding them. Kids are so busy these days too. How do you even get them to practice, Kelly?
Oh gosh, that is a whole other topic too. But when you look at the anxiety piece of it, most of my students come to me and they're too afraid to take the auditions. They would never even consider a studio recital, all state, solo ensemble. There's no way they would touch that 10-foot pole because their anxiety is so significant. I even have some students who don't even play in high school band or middle school band. It's too high pressure in that situation, but they're looking for some self expression. And so my philosophy in lessons is this is a safe environment to make mistakes. We are here to mess up, to try things, to get outside of our comfort zone, to get beyond what is safe so that we can try something. And if it doesn't work, no one dies if you squeak on the clarinet. It's fine. This is a good place for us to do that. And I really feel strongly about this because in so many areas of children's lives at this point, and I work with adults too, so I want to honor that too. But I know a lot of times when we're talking about these audition situations, it is a lot of younger students, at least in my studio. They don't get to make mistakes. You know, in this day and age, everything is graded and your grades matter so much. Your test scores matter so much. Your extracurriculars matter so much. One blemish on your academic record can, reroute your life and your career. And it might mean that you don't get into the school that you want to go to and your goals have to shift a little bit there. It can feel so devastating that it feels like a lot of students are walking on eggshells now. And then if we move into a whole different direction, like anyone can film anything at any point and upload it to the internet. And so you're in an environment where all your friends and colleagues have cameras and you can't say anything dumb either. And you can't just like be a kid who learns from experiences and learns from making mistakes because there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of almost like, especially for young kids, maybe too much accountability these days. They don't really get to just exist. So in lessons, anything goes. And sometimes I'll do things like, this is going to be new for you. I'm going to step outside the room for a second. Now, they don't really know that I can hear through the door. They don't really recognize that. But I'm going to step outside for a second. I'm going to give you 45 seconds. You try it by yourself before I hear it. Sometimes I just need that space. I think a lot of anxiety, though, manifests from either being afraid of the consequences of a mistake or not really knowing how to do something in their brain, quote unquote, right. And my anxiety on the instrument manifested because I realized very late in my academic career, I didn't really know how to practice. effectively and efficiently. I was beating my head against a wall. I was spending 6 to 8 hours a day, hello, TMJ injury, in a practice room on top of everything. And then I was going into lessons and I was still being told I was making too many mistakes and it wasn't good enough. And it took me forever to figure out that it was really because my practicing was not effective and efficient. Well, when you're getting that feedback all the time, you do start to go, I mean, you call it dead possum, I call it sloth. You'd stop, you disconnect for a while. And I never want my students to get to that point. So by allowing them to make mistakes, allowing them to have a toolbox that they can pull from, it empowers them so that they can confidently practice at home and they can come into lessons and feel really good about the progress that they've made. They don't have to worry about how something happens. We're doing that together in the lesson and kind of giving them a safe experience to experiment a little bit so they can apply it safely outside. And I also want them to know that there's no pressure from me to take the audition or play in the recital. But if you want to do that, then not only are we going to talk about the strategies for performance and practice to make that happen, but we're also going to talk about some of the mindset around that too. I view auditions and performances as a celebration. It's not a test. You don't fail it. It is a celebration of your progress. And even if you don't win the spot, that's not really the goal. The goal is to go in there and have some fun, make some awesome music, and get some really good feedback on the progress that you've made so far so that next time we take that audition or next time we play in a recital, it is just even a little bit stronger, even a little bit more progressed in our musicality and our technique. And I think if I'm really honest, is that when I was a kid, my anxiety was so significant that I would get strep throat 36 hours before every single piano recital, every single one. And it was just enough time where my parents figured it out, got me to urgent care. I got the antibiotics and I still had to play this stupid thing. I never got out of it, but I was just a ball of nerves. I don't want that for my students either. And some of that is just like giving them that safe space. You cannot fail. It's okay if you make mistakes. Everyone's going to clap for you anyway. They're cheering for you along the way.
Oh, thank you for saying all that. I think we
Yeah.
lose sight of that. I mean, my perspective is from the orchestral musician side of things. I'm an educator too, but not the level that you're doing. And I think it's really easy to lose sight of why we're doing this. Most of my students, even when I was teaching, I mean, I have a music education degree, and when I was teaching in high school and junior high, those students were not going to become my colleagues in the LA Phil. That was never the point. The point of it was to understand mastery and understand inspiration and joy and community and collaboration and failure and learning up and all that stuff. But we really lose sight of that as teachers. I'm guilty of it as a parent. Both my kids play string instruments. Thank God they didn't choose the trumpet. Woo, it's a win for me. Or the clarinet, because my wife plays the clarinet too. So we hear some really beautiful stuff here, but I can't help but apply my analytical brain. And one of the best things you can do is to find like two or three things to compliment about every single thing they're doing, and then maybe one area for growth. And by the way, musicians, apply this to yourself, please. Like the idea that beating yourself to a pulp in the practice room is the way to be successful and happy, completely wrong. It's completely misguided. We're talking a lot about structure. We're talking about pricing. We're talking about mindset. But just one quick topic, the actual stuff that's happening in the room when you're teaching. Talk a little bit about roses and thorns. How does that show up for you? What does that mean when you talk to students? 'Cause I think it's important to highlight this.
Yeah, this is something that I started doing, I think, when I was in graduate school with my students. And I had seen some other teachers talk about, asking their students to self-assess a lot more. And I went to some of my professors and said, how do you have students self-assess? And they were like, oh, I have them record and then they tell me about it later. And I was like, well, how do we do that in lessons? And so uh, I know in some of my research, I'd come across this idea of roses and thorns. And this is something that is so common in my lesson teaching. It's such a staple in my like teaching repertoire and a staple in my pedagogy that my students just do it now. They're so used to it all the time. But I think it's really important when they finish an etude or they play through a section, whatever it is. One of the first things I always ask is, what are your roses and thorns? Give me three each. And roses, in my definition, are things that we're proud of. Like maybe it went a little bit better than you were expecting. Maybe it's something that you've been working on that you're feeling really proud of or excited about the progress there. A rose is not done. It's not perfect. It's just something that we feel is a bright spot. Like, gosh, that I've been working on the technique there and I remembered more of the accidentals, right? It doesn't have to be I got every single accidental correct, just it was better. The other side of that is thorns. And those are things that are just like kind of still bothering us a little bit in our playing. So again, they're not things we're doing wrong. And something can be a rose and a thorn. I can be proud of the fact that I had more of those accidentals accurate in my playing, and I can also want to get to 100% and remember all of them. I can be proud of the articulation and the quality change, but also I can have a thorn that I would love for that to keep progressing. I'd like my articulation to get faster. And looking at something as two-sided, not necessarily good or bad, is a really big shift. I think, again, if I reflect back on this in my own playing when I was younger, I was always told that I was a very musical player and a very expressive player from a very young age. I internalized that as I am more musical than technical. And when I look at that in the context of my practice challenges in my own playing, it makes a lot of sense. I was afraid of technique because I'd always been classified as one type of player. It was really hard for me to break that down and figure out how to improve the technique and to build that too. And it's something I've put a lot of energy and effort into, especially in my graduate program. But it's exhausting if you're telling yourself all the time that you're bad at something. I don't want my students to have that mindset either. Even if it's something they want to seek improvement in, I want them to know that improvement is possible. It's not something they're good or bad at or anything in between.
I had the same comment to myself as well from my teachers. You're
Mhm.
so musical. What a beautiful sound. I'm not quite sure what's going on with your articulation there, though. And like, I mean, my squirrels that run around my brain, my imposter syndrome shows up as, I'm always struggling with precision and technique.
Mhm.
And I've been doing this for a long time, and I still have the same level of improv, not the same level, but I still have the same, the squirrels that were in my head in high school, they're still there. They're just not as loud as they used to be.
Yeah, and which is hard because then you get into, like, a lesson or performance situation, and the thing that was perfect in the practice room, as soon as anyone else hears it, it's never good.
Oh,
In my experience, again, it's not because I don't know how to play the stupid thing. It's just that now there's other people there and they all believe that I'm musical and not technical, and that, like, in my subconscious that I cannot fully unlock is impacting what's coming out of the horn. I think I tell my students all the time, music is 80% about self-belief. If you're having a good time and you believe you're doing a good job, what's gonna come out the other side is gonna be really, really beautiful too. If you are critical or you don't believe you can do it, like, the little things start to happen. We do a lot of shakes to get the best of us, or we stop supporting with our air all of a sudden, or we pick a tempo that's just whack and we're never gonna get it right. And all those little things start to creep in, and all of a sudden now the audition was a total flop, but the performance felt crummy because we let our brain get the best of us.
yeah. The mind is a terrible thing. That's the takeaway.
Oh,
Guys,
yeah.
just a quick plug, outside the box, BACHS.com. There's so much information here. Kelly and I could probably talk for 5 straight hours, but there's so many resources here. I'm going to show you this website again in a minute, but make sure you check it out. Join the Facebook group that Kelly has as well. There's a lot of great community going on there. I want to circle back to one thing you said before we shift gears into some more of the businessy side of what you're doing. You mentioned giving scholarships to students, and I heard in my head a cry from music
Mhm.
teachers around the country who are making that $20 to $30 an hour rate that's set by the district or whatever, and they're thinking, I am barely making ends meet. How can I
Yeah.
possibly offer a scholarship? Can you talk a little bit about connecting the dots between the mindset part of this, your rates, and how that gives you the ability to offer a scholarship in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say I think success in a lot of music business also comes down to the same confidence that we're talking about and that same self-belief that we were just talking about. So when it comes to rates, we have to believe it to get the higher rate. Now, my philosophy on this, especially when it comes to scholarships, is if I am charging a premium rate and the vast majority of my students are paying that premium rate, then that premium rate should be able to pay all of my bills, support my lifestyle, support my needs comfortably so that whatever your ideal schedule is, let's say, it's 20 to 25 hours per week. If you're charging, I think my rate when I was building the studio, it was around like 80 to 85 an hour, somewhere in that range out of grad school. And that was bringing in between 7,000 and 7,500 per month, I think is a pretty good estimate on that. That was solid. That was really good income. You $7,500 a month, that's like 90K a year. That's really good money. If I can meet all of my needs at 60 a year, then I'm going to plan a little bit over that and I'm going to build in some opportunity for me to then provide some scholarships. For me, I usually cap that at around 10% of my studio. And I think what's so important if you're growing your studio and you're like, gosh, I really want to offer this to people, this is so important, fabulous. It's just not a now thing. Make sure that your income and your revenue is stable first. Make sure that people that can pay you the full rate are paying your full rate and are filling your schedule first. And then as things start to get full, as we can comfortably live and support our lifestyle, then we can definitely loop back and reach out to students who told us that they couldn't necessarily afford our rates and start to offer that scholarship instead. Scholarship for me, what I do in that process is I ask for a statement of need. It's usually 1 to 2 paragraphs. It's very brief. I do not need specific details about numbers and money and income for a family. What I'm looking for is any extenuating circumstances that they might be experiencing. So maybe they are a single income family right now, and that's not normal. Maybe they have a health situation. I've had students who have parents going through chemo treatments. That student should not suffer or should not have extracurriculars taken away from them, or should not have music lessons taken away from them because of something that's going on in their family or their parents' health and wellness. And so it's really important to me that I offer that balance. And for those families, usually that scholarship rate is maybe 50% of my total tuition. I've had students, especially for COVID, that I was teaching pro bono for months at a time. But the other part of that too, I check back in with them every 3 months and I ask for them to resubmit a statement of need. And they know that's because only 10% of my studio gets that. So if at any point their situation changes, and because I've been really honest and candid about how I'm structuring this process with them, they enthusiastically give up that scholarship rate, or will even say, we could afford 75%. Could you give this to somebody else to help them out too? And that, like, I even get chills thinking about some of these situations and conversations I've had with parents, because it's so impactful and important, and they want their kids to have those experiences and those activities, and they want the music lessons, and they also don't want to take it away from other kids too. So I think that statement of need, honestly, in large part exists to just weed out people that are searching for a discount and negotiation versus someone who genuinely has a need. If they have a need, they will ask, and they will, with a lot of reverence and respect, take you up on that offer.
So I want to make a quick observation. And this applies to probably a lot of mastery and self-development. Definitely auditions for people who are listening there. Definitely teaching, absolutely running a successful business. Sometimes the paradigm shift, the flipping of the script, the awareness matrix is not linear. It's not logical, and it might be a little bit of a world of opposites kind of thing. For example, if you're bottom of the barrel, barely making your budget every month, teaching for that low rate, or performing gigs that are underpaid and they're terrible and are soul sucking, because we've all done those gigs. I've worn tights at the Ren Fair. Okay, I've been there, done that.
Please tell me there's pictures somewhere.
There's one picture in a box in my attic. It is not digitized, and someday I will feel comfortable enough to share that with the world. It's you don't want to see it. It's horrifying. Woo! Yeah, I remember that. That was horrible.
I love it.
I just totally lost my train of thought because I was thinking about axe throwing. But it's nonlinear. So, like what Kelly's saying here is, what if you were to raise your rates? Okay, just go with me here for a second. What if you were to double your rates? Because most of you probably need to do that anyway. It would be scary for a while. You may have to bust outside of that district set fee and find your own students. By the way, there's a whole internet of people who need music lessons that are the perfect fit for you. Then you would not only be walking around with confidence and abundance mindset, which is huge, but you'd also be able to turn around then and lead with service in a way that is really powerful, really impactful for people who are suffering through all kinds of things, who knows what, and you're able to do that. You have basically pulled yourself up into that scenario just by changing the way that you view your self-value. And I guarantee you this is impacting your auditions too, folks, those of you who are on the circuit. Your mindset is way more important than the things that you're doing. I've said this before. I'll just spout it up for a second. Kelly, help me out here. How would you define a belief? What is a belief?
Oh gosh, I feel very put on the spot. Belief is something that you attach to yourself, to an item, to a situation that is a construct in our brain. It can be changed. It's something that we attach temporarily. It's something that we attach long term, and how long that thought or that definition is attached to something is totally up to you.
A great definition. I couldn't have said it better myself. I have another definition I like to share, which is a belief. And if we're talking about pricing, or whether or not you can be successful, or whether you can afford to buy a new car or get that orchestra job or whatever, A belief is just a thought that you keep thinking over and over again.
Mm.
So your thought becomes your belief. And then what do your beliefs impact? Your beliefs impact your actions. And your actions, setting your rate, taking the audition, whatever, your actions create your reality. So, like, if you want to do math, your thoughts create your reality. I mean, I really believe that that's true. And this idea of offering a scholarship, if that sounded outrageous to you, I really want you to stop and think for a second about that little chain of events that I
Mm.
just pointed out. How can you go back and start at the beginning with your thoughts? What thoughts are you thinking over and over again that are holding you into that position? If there's anything you can get out of this podcast today, or listening to Kelly or me at all, is I want you to sort of reevaluate those thoughts, because that is all you really have control over in the end. It doesn't always work out, but I guarantee you it won't work out if you're setting yourself to that negative mindset. Okay. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about marketing this thing. Like, if you've
Mm.
set all this up and you've got all the contracts and the contract pay rates and everything set up, and you've got the website and the things, you got to get out there and talk about it. Social media is a great way to do this, but I think that can feel really overwhelming for a lot of musicians, a lot of teachers. People think that building a strong online presence means you have to be like a clown or a dog and pony show and floss on TikTok or something. How do you help people create a balance between being relatable and maintaining professionalism, but still getting the message out?
Yeah. I think when it comes to marketing, there are two categories of action that we can take around marketing. I like to break this into more of a short term, or like a short game, than a long term or long game. In the short term, we can do things like post in local Facebook groups or post on your local Nextdoor page, potentially generate some interest in lessons. The downside about that is you have to keep doing it over and over and over again. And we're at that point, like, maybe bugging people, spamming things a little bit, not always super aligned or feeling really authentic with what we're doing. The other part of that too is a lot of people go into Facebook groups and they say, I'm Kelly, here are all of my degrees and my qualifications, come take lessons with me. But that's not really what someone's buying. It's not your background. I had a really clear example of this. I had a client who moved after graduate school at Eastman out to the San Francisco area. And when he was telling parents he went to Eastman, one literally looked at him and said, "What's that?" Obviously, in the music world, we know what that means about the caliber of his playing and his career, but that has no bearing or context for someone that doesn't have a lot of musical background. So when you're doing that marketing, it's about the student. What is the experience that they're going to have in lessons? What is the atmosphere that you provide in lessons? What is the result, or what are things that students really love about working with you, the experience in lessons that they give positive feedback on? And that's a really important part of that. In the long term, we can take all that and we can apply it into local organizations and individuals who are in contact with our potential ideal students. So again, common example of this is I'm going to email all the school band directors in my area and offer clarinet lessons to their students. The downside is direct from what band directors have told me. You might be one of 50 emails of the exact same offer that they've gotten that month. That's actually really common. And the problem with that is now you're obviously one of many. They're not going to respond to you. They probably already have a friend that they're referring to or a local music store that they refer to. We are a stranger on the internet. They don't really trust us. So we're reaching out and we're offering something that they don't really need, doesn't necessarily help them, puts more work on them, and also we're a weirdo. So how do we get that connection? Instead of asking for something, marketing is about offering something. It's about showing alignment and building trust. So in that process, reaching out to local music school or music programs and band directors, offer them support. Like, hey, I know your upcoming concerts are on the schedule. Would sectionals be helpful? No solo ensembles on the calendar for the spring. Would it be helpful to do some one-on-one coaching with students that might be struggling a little bit more? How can I come and do a practice technique presentation for your entire ensemble, whatever that might look like? The goal is supporting them, and also that way they can see you teach, or they can see you work with students and see the impact of that to build trust. Now they know that you get really good results. We can apply that to school music programs, to homeschool co-ops, to church music directors, to local youth ensembles, to networking with other private music instructors. I work with high anxiety, but I have other teachers in my area that don't. Some are fabulous jazz players. That is not at all in my wheelhouse, unfortunately. Having those referrals back and forth is really helpful. On the social media front, I would definitely categorize it as a long game. It's usually not the first thing I recommend that anyone does, um, in part because we want to build some self belief in our teaching, but we also want to build some testimonials. And when we're on social media, we need a little bit more proof because people are finding us through the internet. So start locally, build some of those connections, get a few students, and then start to use some of the things that are being talked about in your lessons or common questions that students are bringing to start creating content. You might consider recording like another POV of your lesson where it's just your face that you can watch back and see how you explain something or how you taught that subject and how you taught that technique. And maybe you explained it 3 different ways in that lesson and one clicked with your student. What was that one thing and how can I create content out of that so somebody else can learn from that too? And when we're looking at content, it needs to be authentic. The energy really matters. You can tell when someone is saying something, but they're like a little dead behind the eyes and they don't really mean it or it doesn't look aligned. And we all scroll right past it. Whether
Yeah.
it's conscious or not, that's not going to be an engaging video for you to watch and to keep moving. So find the content that's fun for you to make or is really passionate and really aligned. And then also the content that creates followers. People that want to see more from you, want to keep learning from you is a really important part of that too.
Yeah. Musicians, fun fact, you are surrounded with shiny objects for marketing. Like
Oh
everything
yeah.
you have, your instruments, the practice room, the concert halls, the gigs, the whatever, like it's all interesting to look at. It's really kind of amazing that we have all the, I mean, look, like mutes and stuff behind me. It's fun to look at. People want to look at it. So just literally observe your surroundings. And this is especially important when you're first starting out building. And I think it's pretty obvious by now, Kelly is recommending probably strongly, if I can put words in your mouth, create a hybrid or online teaching studio. Break out of your local area, find people online. There's ways to super deliver high impact online. Also, it creates crossing that line of availability where not everyone's going to be able to travel to an LA to get a lesson with me, but they can find me online from anywhere. There's a digital divide, and that's a huge thing that I talk about that I can't wait to figure out how to solve that because there are people that don't have this access either, which is
Yeah.
not working. Kelly, if you guys are noticing, there's a lot of great information here about running a business and how to market it. I don't think Kelly has a business degree, but like, how do you learn this stuff? Where do you figure it out?
Mm.
I just have to read something that I found here. Your marketing experience kind of began with an internship at the Waukesha County Conservatory of Music. You're responsible for running outreach programs, huge advocate of outreach. If you're not advocating for your art, by the way, musicians, what are we doing here, right? And build brand awareness to attract new students. But all of a sudden, your experience, you're now getting recruited to work with major brands, including Cadillac, American Express, Anheuser-Busch, and Red Bull. Kelly, talk to me a little bit about Red Bull. How did you end up doing this? What was that job like, and what did you learn from that?
Yeah, Red Bull was my first marketing job when I was an undergrad, and at the time I was working at my university had an outdoor center, and I've always loved being outside. I grew up going to outdoor wilderness tripping camps. There's a place up in northern Wisconsin that you do progressively longer trips every summer as you grow up. So my longest one was 2 weeks up in the Apostle Islands and Lake Superior sea kayaking. Loved to be outside, so that was a great job. Problem is, it paid minimum wage, wasn't making a whole lot of money, but I needed to work in college to pay my bills. Like I could not have been in music school if I didn't have a part-time job at least. And I had done a bunch of marketing for the trips. It was a new program, the outdoor program. So I'd been doing a lot of like outreach and trying to take things that I'd done at the music store, apply them to that position. Long story short, I was recruited through some mutual connections that I met through the outdoor center. People that had come and done some of the trips that I'd run and marketed. And they basically approached me on campus one day and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about working in marketing? There's this position available for Red Bull." So what that started as was the little car that drives around with the can on the back. That was me. Okay, really, really fun. It paid so much better. It was like twice what I was making hourly, which was the real reason I said yes. I wasn't like super excited at first about working for Red Bull necessarily, but like the money was fabulous. I could make my own schedule. It was great. Um, that progressed pretty quickly. It's something about my personality is I'm always looking for efficiency. That's something my brain really values, which is part of why the practice thing was so frustrating for me. But I really, really value efficiency. And so I was looking at some of our local work in the team. And I was like, hey, I've got some ideas and I don't want to overstep, but I've got some ideas on how we can improve things. And all of a sudden I was planning like training events and uh, local outreach and activations for Red Bull on a larger scale, which was awesome. Still part time, I was getting extra hours and I could do some of it from home, and it was awesome. That progressed pretty quickly. When I was graduating, I was picking up some like part-time work on activations on site for some events. And then also when I was in graduate school, I started pitching brands on ideas like, hey, now we're living in Georgia. These are things that I've seen work really well in this other medium-sized market. Have you tried any of these things on campus? And I was reaching back out to brands that I'd either worked with before or brands that I had some kind of mutual contact at. And it was pretty gutsy, honestly, when I was reaching out and saying, there's this thing. I think you should be doing this at this thing. I can help if that would be supportive. And all of a sudden I was like helping to coordinate events too. So that work in marketing was so, again, like it was lucrative, but I really enjoyed the challenge of it and piecing those things together. And an important through line that I just want to point out here, it was all organic, meaning none of it was paid marketing. Like you're not paying for a Facebook ad or a Google ad to get clients or to get customers to see that brand. Sometimes it was, um, I'm trying to think of a good fun example. It could be a music festival, for example. It can be, there was a year that Red Bull did some sponsorship for the America's Cup. They came into Chicago and they brought all the boats in. And as a fun aside, my husband and co-founder Isaac is a professional sailor, so we were definitely a big sailing family. So when I saw that coming in, I was able to kind of pitch some extra things because I knew more about the event and the race itself, knowing where we should be physically near the course and where those observation decks might be, and also be able to promote, there's practice days ahead of time. It's not just this event. And those were things that my team, my bosses, they didn't know anything about. So when you have an expertise, that's really helpful. Or, hey, I know that students in practice rooms might want some caffeine. Can we go at 6 a.m. before school starts and just drop a little Red Bull in every single practice room? Those were things that I was actively doing and bringing different experience to, and it grew from there. So that's kind of a long answer to that, but it's an important part of what we're doing in the marketing side too, is really trying to be omnipresent. That's something I learned a lot from those brands.
Coming to a practice room near you, Red Bull and alcohol. Those are I mean, if you're going to resonate with musicians, right? Look, guys, success is non-linear. Kelly's
Yeah.
path took her into working for companies that were completely unaligned with a music career. I worked in a running store selling running shoes. I got to tell you, having hundreds of interactions a week with people I did not know, where I had to listen to them, meet them. Selling running shoes is all about like listening to people and hearing like, oh, my calves hurt or my back hurts or I'm tired or whatever. It's somewhat about the shoe and understanding the product, but it's understanding about how can I solve your problem right now? How can I make you feel really empowered? How can we have a good conversation that doesn't feel weird? How can you not feel shamed if you're trying to lose weight or trying to break a world record or whatever? Like those skills help me big time in terms of being a better educator, a better performer, and a better advocate. So look around your space. And also, can I just say, doing that kind of a job does not mean that you've quit music or you're a failure at music. Again, portfolio career, having multiple streams of income and multiple ways you can lead with service is, again, it's way more fun. I'm telling you right now, it's way more interesting in the long game of a career. It's more lucrative, and you're actually going to end up supporting more people. By the way, don't be afraid to bring ideas to your bosses or the people above you, because I'm going to tell you something. Think about all those people you went to high school with. He kind of didn't really know what was going on. Maybe they weren't the sharpest tools in the shed. Guess what? They're out running businesses right now. Nobody knows what they're doing. I mean, people, they're experts in the field, and there are people who have a lot of experience, but nobody is like, this is the way. That person that's running whatever company, they were the person working the front desk or running packages around when they started, and they figured it out as they went. And guess what? You can figure that out as you go too, whether that's in terms of auditions or running a successful music studio. So
Oh, absolutely. There were ideas, and there were ideas that I pitched to brands for marketing that were terrible. Like in retrospect, they were awful ideas. But the fact that I brought them something, especially when it's a brand that I wasn't working with, I was bringing it through a mutual connection. The ones that I brought that weren't great, they still listened a lot of the time. And again, part of that is because I'm using my network and I'm saying, I worked with this person at Anheuser-Busch they have a mutual LinkedIn connection with this person at Cadillac, and I think I see a really good connection here. How can I help make this happen and get some of those connections made so that they will sit at the table and listen to me, right? But I'm never just bringing one idea. I'm bringing like 3 to 5 and saying, here are the 2 that I believe in the most, but also if for whatever reason you're already doing this or you've thought about this, here's some kind of backup plans or some other ways that we can expand the experience a little bit. And when you're doing that kind of a situation and you're bringing ideas to the table, that's what most companies are struggling with. As a quick aside too, there is so much opportunity in the music industry, and that is something I'd wish I'd known earlier. I was doing all this marketing for non-music brands, and it was great. It was fine. I still really enjoyed it. But did you know Yamaha has an entire in-house marketing agency for the entire company? It is its own company within Yamaha that does all the marketing for all of the Yamaha brands and products. And that core team is responsible for a lot, but they also hire very specifically people who have music background or have automotive background who can market to people because they themselves are the key consumer and they understand that mindset. Music companies love hiring musicians. The problem is that most of us aren't willing to take on jobs that aren't performing and playing in some ways, and or have not yet allowed ourselves to build skills outside of that so that we could get hired by those companies and brands and still work in marketing or even in education sales, for example, through a music company and music products company. There's a ton of opportunity. I didn't realize how big it was until I started going to NAMM. It's shocking how big the industry is. That show has 140,000 people most years. It's bananas.
By the way, thank you for plugging the sponsor of the Honesty Pill podcast, YamahaUSA.com. Go check out YamahaUSA.com and say thank you so
Yeah.
much. Yeah, big fan of Yamaha here too. How are you doing, Kelly? How's your brain? I'm asking you so many questions. Are you hanging in there?
Good.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm great. This stuff energizes me so much. I'm having a good time.
Me too. I have a couple more questions that are specific here. The reason you mentioned musicians don't often step outside the box, I just said it again, outside the box of what they think they're qualified for, is it's scary, scary, scary. Like it's hard to beat up against that imposter syndrome and feel like, yeah, I deserve to do this. So what is the NICE file? Can you share that with our listeners real quick and tell me, how can we create one for ourselves?
Yeah. I have this sweet little folder on my desktop on my computer. It's in the top left corner. I can see it right now, actually, on my screen. I put it intentionally in the top left because it's really accessible. I can always see it behind whatever window I have open for the most part. And it is called the NICE file. It's something I started doing a couple of years ago when I started doing Outside the Box and I had another business that I was running. And some days as a musician, as an entrepreneur, some days are amazing. Like you are riding high, you have wonderful conversations like this, or something just really clicks for your students, or um, maybe you sign up a whole bunch of students in one week and it's amazing. And then there are the other weeks or the other days that are a little bit less awesome. Like a big hiccup comes through, or you make a mistake and you own it, but it still feels really crummy that it happened, and that can bring you down. Or maybe you're not quite firing on all cylinders, or you're feeling stuck with a student, or you're feeling stuck in your audition process, or your practice is just not going well and we're not progressing. On those days, it's really helpful to have some backing or some proof and some evidence for yourself of the things that are going well. Meaning, in that NICE file, I have screenshots of testimonials from parents, screenshots of nice emails and messages that I've received from clients. Candidly, I have screenshots of messages that I've received from my parents, like my dad telling me he's proud of me, like little things like that that make me feel good. Things that when I read it in the moment, I was like, gosh, that's really nice. Or like, yes, that's awesome. Those things get screenshot and they all get put in a nice file, because sometimes when you're in that mode of like, everything is terrible, I have no idea what I'm doing, happens way more often than any of us would like to admit openly. But I'll be honest and say that sometimes I can have a high and a very low all in the same day. We can really ride the full roller coaster together. But in that NICE file, if I flip through the first few, usually like the first 5, I'm like, yeah, whatever, sure, I'm good at this. Okay, whatever. By the time you get to like 15, 20, 40, your mind does start to shift significantly. All of a sudden, you do believe what you're seeing. Like, gosh, if this many people have had good experiences, or if my students have had this many wins, or if parents are this happy with the teaching that I'm providing, or if this many other musicians have said that I am a strong musical player, it starts to feel more real, and it really does shift that mindset. So I'm a big believer in affirmations, but I think sometimes we have to back up those affirmations with proof. And the more social proof that you can provide to yourself, the easier it is to shift that mindset too.
I have something similar. I call it the evidence list. And I have my, I like the nice file a lot better though, but I have my business clients create an evidence list, which is just like cold, hard facts. I have done this. I have accomplished this. These are my wins. Here are my testimonials, and just have it there. So when you're having a conversation with a parent or a prospective person or whatever, that it's not inauthentic and it's not braggy. It's just here are the things that people have said, and it does help to read those. I have a Post-it note on my locker at the LA Phil at Walt Disney Concert Hall, written by my daughter when I was practicing the high C fanfare from Mahler 7 that all three trumpets do. Beam, ba-da-da-da-dee, ba-da-da-da-dee, ba-da-da-da-dee. And I was down here in my studio playing it over and over. Her bedroom is right above me. And so she came down. She's like, "Why are you playing that over and over again, Daddy?" And I was like, "Well, it's the hard part, you know?" And so she wrote me a Post-it note and stuck it on my trumpet case. It said, "Practice hard part." And there was a big heart and a smiley face. That is on my locker. I'll have to post that on Instagram at some point. But
So
like,
cute.
that makes me like, first of all, she was approaching the hard part with joy and love, literally. And I'm like, I'll never forget that. It's just an awesome thing to have. So yeah, create that for yourself. The nice file. I love it. I have one more technical question, which is, you mentioned testimonials. And again, I'm hearing my
Yeah.
music educators creating private music studios, which is our focus today, screaming out, how do I get testimonials? Like that, it feels really salesy and gross, and I don't know how to do it. I don't like self-promotion, but I am a really good teacher and my students are
Mhm.
getting a lot of wins. Like, how do you get those testimonials so you can use them to leverage your marketing in a real way?
Yeah. Okay, before I do that, I wanna pick on one thing that you said, which is the salesy piece of things. If it feels salesy, if it feels like you are being, because salesy, we normally think like really pushy or like kind of aggressive, not authentic to how we would normally say something. If you start to feel that way, hit pause. Just back up for a second. Sales is not a dirty word. Sales is not a bad thing. You can sell authentically and candidly every time you walk into an audition room. That is what you're doing. You are selling yourself. But through our instrument, it doesn't have to be pushy. We just play the music the way that we've interpreted it to the best of our ability. We can do the same thing in a sales conversation. We can bring our authentic selves, the language that we use and how we present things to that conversation. And the same thing applies here with testimonials. Here's what I don't like personally when I'm asked for a testimonial. I don't like automated emails and text messages. I don't like when for example, for a while I'd leave my chiropractor and I would get an automated text right away that was like, "Don't forget to leave us a Google review." Have I ever done that? No, it wasn't a personalized ask. Like there's no context for what you're looking for in that. I know you're not asking me. I know the computer is just like sending that out on blast and it doesn't really resonate. What does resonate is last week, actually, I was at my PT appointment. This was on Monday this week. I mentioned earlier, really significant TMJ pain. And I've been going to a PT now for the last couple of months for dry needling, which has been uncomfortable, incredibly, incredibly helpful. And I'm getting a lot more relief from it. At one point during the appointment, I was like, "God, Jamie, I feel so much better. I feel so much. I used to wake up in the morning and my jaw would be like frozen. I could barely move it. I had to like massage it to get going or like scraping with my gua sha. Feels so good." She goes, "Makes me so happy to hear that, Kelly. Like I'm so proud of that because I've worked really hard with you to make that happen." And she's like, "And I don't mean to change the subject here, but gosh, if you were willing to mention that in a Google review, it would mean the world to me because I'm so proud of the progress that we made together." Here's the difference. I felt valued in that conversation. I gave her feedback and she appreciated the feedback that I gave so much that she wanted it in writing to promote her business. That's the kind of experience we're looking for with our students. Now, if you want to prompt that a little bit, because not everybody, like obviously parents on a weekly basis aren't like, "You're awesome." It'd be great if they were, but that's not always happening. So sometimes you have to get a little bit more intentional about that communication. My favorite way to ask for a testimonial is to email a parent or a student after a great lesson, after a great audition, after a great performance at the recital, whatever it is. Sometimes it's just like, "Man, we've really been working on articulation lately, and Jimmy just crushed it today in the lesson." Like all of a sudden it clicked, and I'm just so proud of him. He's doing such a great job. And The normal response for most people is to say, thank you so much. It's because he really likes working with you and you're a fabulous teacher. Thank you for everything that you're doing. I would say like 80% of the time, humans, when we get a compliment, we give a compliment back. That's just a really normal way that we converse and take in that information. In which case, we can graciously accept that compliment and that feedback and then say, as a quick aside, if you were willing, it would mean the world to me. I'm working on building up some of my marketing for the studio. It'd mean the world to me if you would leave that as a Google review, and here's the link. And to take that one step further, I am specifically saying Google review. It is great when we get a nice text or email to copy and paste and put on the website. That's fabulous. If it's on Google, there's two advantages. Number one, it's more believable that it came from a third party source and you didn't write it yourself, right? There's evidence that it came from somebody else. The second part of that is now your search engine optimization and your search results are elevated. It's not just your website that might pop up because somebody else might be running paid ads and they might get boosted over you. If you have a Google My Business listing, which is totally free to do, you don't even have to list your address. You can start the listing and then pull it back off and do a service area listing instead. Really helpful. And then people can leave those reviews. So when someone searches trumpet lessons in LA and Chris's website pops up, they see that Google business listing with 5 stars. They can read those reviews, and now there's actually a reason for them to go to your website and potentially reach out to you. And the best part about all of that is they wrote it as authentic feedback. They didn't sit down and think, I am now writing a review for Chris, because we all start to say the same things all the time. Like, I would recommend this service, which is like, again, great, but it's not really aligned feedback. Let them write it from their heart. And then if they want to copy, paste, edit, tweak a little bit before they put in the Google review, fabulous, but you also overcame all the writer's block. That's a lot easier for them to make that happen quickly too.
Oh, I just took a note. I do not have a single Google review, and I have a giant folder of reviews because I asked for testimonials when people say I follow that strategy you just mentioned, but without the Google and SEO. I've heard, you guys heard of Google? It's pretty big. I think it's got a bright future. So yeah, SEO, search engine optimization, is part of that bat signal messaging that you want to get out. That's a great tip,
Yeah.
Kelly.
Thank you. And I'll add on that too. Video testimonials are also super helpful. I'm a big fan. When you go to the Outside the Box website, you'll see all of these video case studies because there you can hear the intonation and the inflection and the intention behind what someone is saying. Better yet, it showcases your personality and your working relationship with someone. So if you click that case studies button at the top of that page, you're going to see dozens of these. And I haven't even uploaded them all, but there's so many.
Segue skills are outstanding. I was just about to
Thank
jump on your website. This is outsidethebox.com, and you can see what Kelly's talking about here. Guys, look at this website. This is incredible. Are you guys getting feedback from your students and your people you work with and putting it, look at this, just keeps going forever. This is incredible. Also, there's calls to actions.
I think I have to add more. Whoops.
What's that?
Sorry, Isaac. I said, sorry, Isaac. He needs to add more. That's not even fully up to date. Our bad.
But that's still impressive social proof. By the way, what can we get if we enter our email here and subscribe to our newsletter? Can you talk about some freebies, pricing guides, things like that?
Yeah. We were talking about this beforehand. I didn't even think about inbox. So there's a couple things you're going to find on our website. First thing is we do have that Facebook group on the top bar. That is a free public Facebook group. It is a no sales, no BS Facebook group. Think like teacher break room and hangout. So the entire goal of that is like, if you have questions about running a studio or if you have a weird situation, like that's the place to ask. And also to just kind of edify our own group a little bit too. A lot of our past clients are in that group. So I know I'm biased, but I think the information that's shared there is really good. And I try to chime in where I can, but there's just a really supportive community. I'm really protective of that. Second thing in the top right corner, there's that request a free strategy call. If you have follow-up questions on anything that we're talking about, and or if you are like thinking about next steps for your studio, like the studio is pretty full and you want additional support or growth, that is what that call is for. It's a 45-minute free call. It's not even a sales call. We won't talk about our programming at all. It's just a place for us to talk about your ideal student, what you're providing, update some studio data, and then from there we'll create a customized action plan for you. And that is yours to keep. There's no obligation on that whatsoever. But I want to be sharing this information. Obviously, if it's helpful, we can talk about working together. But the whole goal is just to get information out there because it is something that we should have learned in music school. And then the final thing I'll shout out is at the bottom there, like you had mentioned, we do have this brand new newsletter that I'm so excited about called Inbox, because again, we love a good pun around here. But Inbox is a weekly accountability email on Wednesday. The goal is that some of that's coming from me, some of that's coming from the musicians and studio owners that I really admire. It is not all just about private lesson teaching, but the goal in Inbox is to provide you with some kind of inspiration or some action steps to take that week or a little mindset shift to help you, and also to set some intention so that when you get that email the next Wednesday, maybe there's something that you've done in the last 7 days that you had set that intention from in the last email too. So that comes every single Wednesday. It's a great, again, just totally free resource there as well.
So for those of you who are just listening on the audio, I'm scrolling through Kelly's website. This is, first of all, Isaac's high five, Isaac. I think he's your web designer. This is absolutely drop dead, gorgeous website. Really well done. I know Isaac's listening right now. So fantastic job. I really am blown away. So it looks great. Okay, there's so much there for you to check out. Guys, go to outsidethebox.com. Again, it's BACHS.com. I think there's a podcast there with some trumpet player from the LA Phil too. You can check out that we flip roles. I was looking for it so I could shamelessly self-promote for a second, but I can't find it. It's on here somewhere. All right, last question. This is sort of, this is the Honesty Pill podcast. I named this company for people learning how to fail up, basically. Honesty Pill is about celebrating your wins and leaning into the things and doubling down on the things that you're doing well. It's also about getting really, 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 really uncomfortable and leaning into your vulnerability and seeing things like, what can I let go of this not serving me? Can you share a time when you hit a major roadblock or, an Honesty Pill moment where you had to face some hard truths or let go of something that was threatening to derail your journey? How did tackling that shape where you are now?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is I talk a lot about ideal students and aligned students in our work. And part of the reason that's so important to me is because, as I mentioned earlier, we've all been the student that's not quite an aligned relationship and it's not as fulfilling. But I have also taken on students that are not 100% a fit, or sometimes students started as a really good fit and things have shifted and maybe I haven't been as quick to react to that and move on. I have one student in particular that comes to mind in this when I was teaching more piano lessons who was so sweet and just an adorable, adorable child. Very sensory. There were some other nice little spicy things going on there that I necessarily wasn't the person to handle or equipped to handle. And the challenge in that particular situation was that it was the grandparents that were bringing him to lessons. And so parents weren't totally involved. And so practice was an issue. And there were a lot of moving pieces that were really difficult. And also there was a little, I think it's fair to call it delusion. Like grandma and grandpa, a direct quote was, "It's not just talent. He's got heart." He was 5 years old and he licked the piano keys every single lesson. Like he would be playing, he would stop, he'd go, and like dip his little head down. I had to catch him and sit him back up. Like, no, that's gross. We can't do that. All that to say, it was a family that I loved the student, and it was not the right situation for me. It was not the right fit. And I really powered through because I thought, like, I can figure this out and I can help him. And I do like him. He's really sweet. And I would love to solve this with his family. And I pushed and I pushed, but it was getting to a point where, like, my Wednesday at 3:00, man, all week I was dreading my Wednesday. I would say to Isaac, I just have to get through Wednesday at 3. And then the rest of my week is so much easier because it was such a taxing lesson. And the hard part about that is, in retrospect, the other students around that were suffering. They might not have known it or recognized it, but I was so anxious about that lesson that on Tuesday night at 8:00, when I was teaching my last lesson, I was still thinking about the next day and like, what am I going to do for him? Like, how am I going to solve this? In reality, I should have moved that student out of my studio a lot sooner. And I didn't necessarily get negative feedback from them, but like grandma and grandpa were super on board and they loved me, but mom and dad had some questions, and it caused some slight conflict in the relationship because they were struggling and they weren't necessarily seeing results, and we weren't really getting a lot of results because it wasn't really working all that well. And finally, there was a recital that I was hosting. He was not prepared. I had to put like colored stickers on the keys so he could follow along and play the piece, which worked out great. It was a good solution, but it wasn't ideal. And in rehearsal that week in the studio that I rent, the owner was there and the owner was talking to grandpa, and I had him play the piece. And afterwards I went and was talking to grandpa, and he was standing next to me. And all of a sudden we all turned around and he was running. He had his little face like this. He was running his tongue along the outside of the whole grand piano case, this like beautiful $40,000 Steinway. And in that moment, I was like, okay, I'm out of my depth. Like, I know I'm out of my depth. I can't, and it's not the child's fault, but I know I'm out of my depth. I can't do anything about this. It's out of my hands right now. So I actually had a really hard conversation after the recital with that family. Like, thank you so much for trusting me with your child. It's been such a joy. And also, there's this fabulous teacher that just started here, and her entire background is working with young students who maybe have some learning challenges. And I would love for you to take at least a trial lesson with her and see how it goes. Because I think that some of her approaches might be just a little bit more helpful for him. That was not a comfortable conversation. And even though it was done with a lot of love and a lot of support, I think the hard part in that is there's still that feeling of rejection that a family might be experiencing. And it got maybe a tad more dramatic than I was expecting on their end. I was, I just kind of got a little quiet. It was fine, but I saw him a year later walking into that studio happy as a clam. And that teacher said so many times that he was a fabulous student and they were having a great time. And on the back end, it made a lot of sense. And it again, should have happened a lot sooner. But I look back at that and I know that there's mistakes that I made early in my teaching career trying to force it for the sake of a student, when in reality, for the sake of a student, I had no business forcing it at all.
Well, thank you for sharing that story, and it highlights again how we all learn in different ways. I think we're all neurospicy in our own ways. I mean, there's a reason they call it a spectrum. We're all on it somewhere, and recognizing that we're maybe the not best fit, or we are a great fit for a certain learning style or a student, is difficult, especially if your decision making on how you're moving forward, what gigs you're taking, what auditions you're taking, what students you're accepting, is based on fear and lack. Like, oh my God, I can't let that $30 go. You're not leading with service anymore. You've lost sight of your mission. Your GPS coordinates have gone out the window. And I think if there's one big kind of takeaway from that wraps up our whole conversation here is, like, really stick to your emotional GPS coordinates. And even when it feels uncomfortable, you've got to stay the course and you've got to keep pushing through that, letting go what's not serving you and doubling down on the things that are. I had a student, and I guess I can name his name because, well, I'm not going to name his name because it was 100 years ago, but I'm sure he's not going to watch this podcast. But his name was Justin, okay? And he would come in, this was in Boston, and he would come in with a full, like, snow snorkel zipped up to the top, like Kenny from South Park. And he would just sit there. He wouldn't even take his trumpet out. And after like a month of this, I said, hey, man, can we chat for a second? Like, totally no pressure. I'm like, do you want to take trumpet lessons? Because I'm like having, a really hard time figuring out how to show up for you right now. And he's like, I hate the trumpet. My parents are going through something and they're just making me do this. And I chatted with him and they had no idea that he was so miserable. And I said, we don't have to do this. There's probably something else that Justin's interested in. And I hope that was game changing, at least for his Wednesday at 3 experience, because it was mine. Yeah. But what an interesting experience teaching music education is. So
yeah, well, and that's one of the beauties of your own private studio. You get to choose. You're not working for somebody else's studio. You're not working in a school district. You get to choose who's in your room. But part of that means that we also have, I think now, as I've learned and grown a lot in the last 2 years of my teaching, we have an ethical responsibility to be honest about who that ideal student is and who we can help and support and what is most fulfilling for us too.
Well said. Great place to end. Kelly, thank you so much. Conversations like this remind me why I love doing this podcast. Your insights on building a thriving studio, balancing performance, dealing with all this mindset stuff is absolutely game-changing. Go listen to this podcast again. By the way, I heard the sound effects of people leaving questions in the chat all throughout, and for some reason, none of them showed up. So if you posted a question, I apologize. I didn't get to it. I'll go see if I can find those and we can answer them in an email or something like that.
Yeah, or like send them to me in a DM or something on Instagram, or send them to Chris on a DM on Instagram, and we can like do a little story or something and answer them all too if we miss anything. That's not a problem at all.
Thank you again,
Kelly. I love
questions.
Fire away.
All right. Everybody go check out Kelly's website at outsidethebox.com. Join the Facebook group. I'll put all that in the show notes. And hey, if these things resonate with you, remember to subscribe to this channel. I'm really shooting for building the YouTube channel to keep this conversation going. All right, everybody, that's it for me. I'm out of here. And in case you need a reminder, it's time to face the music. Happy practicing. See you next time.